Our First Amendment rights are threatened, that is of great concern. So, as this is a community of residents that have really taken a very high road in terms of their advocacy, their legal action. They have held themselves in great esteem for years dealing with this project. There may be times when residents protest as well. There may be times when they hold rallies. There may be times when residents choose to engage in nonviolent direct action. It's extremely important that municipalities and local police departments are working with residents to, again, protect their health and safety as they exercise their First Amendment rights. The only other thing I would caution is to frame Sunoco as a rogue operator or a bad apple. They are certainly rogue and they are certainly bad, but I think that their behavior is also indicative of an industry as a whole. And I think as additional operators present their plans to local municipalities, we should look at those plans and those operators with a discerning eye and not simply throw Sunoco ETP under the bus and think that everyone else is a bed of roses. That would be my recommendation. Thank you.
Thanks.
If I can just, I'm sorry, if you don't mind if I have one more suggestion. You have a very powerful platform in your communication with residents, and there are many times that members of EXE and we try to get information out regarding public comment periods, regarding when we want the public to engage more with state agencies. And something that you could do is help get word out. So when there is an important meeting, an important public comment period, having the township supervisors and the township in general encourage residents that the reach may be that much further than our Facebook pages and our email distribution list.
Sometimes we post an announcement, but all we do is say, here's something and here's a link. And we don't provide any color or, this is what it means. And we can do that, I guess, in a factual way without expressing opinions. And that's our concern, is that we just need to put the facts out there and say, this is what's happening, this is the impact. And we need to have this information as opposed to taking a position one way or another. Wherever we have residents that believe in each direction. So,
can I bring up a point?
Right.
You said that all 5 supervisors agree that this is not the right route for an NGL pipeline. What about the other townships in Chester and Delaware County? Do they know how you people feel?
I don't know the answer to that. I can
Well,
tell
maybe
you.
you could announce that this board has announced that they feel that this route is incorrect for an NGL pipeline. And maybe other townships could follow suit. What?
It's being announced
Either
right
way.
as we speak now, with live streaming.
So I have a question that I like to throw out to the group, and it's regarding emergency services. And I had a conversation with, I talked to some of you, almost all of you, every once in a while. And Eric Friedman said something to me that was talking about emergency services, and I'm attending a tabletop scenario presentation on Friday out at the Chester County Emergency Services Training Center. And what they're going to do is they're going to do a scenario of an NGL emergency in Chester County. And I want to go out and observe, how that works and how they think about it. And I was talking to Eric about it, and Eric said something to me that just hit me right between the eyes. And he said, it's interesting, emergency services probably does understand what they need to do. The problem is the residents don't. And I thought that was a pretty startling, thing to hear. And I'm thinking, that's true. So I guess my question is, I'd like to throw out emergency services response as a general topic, and see if anyone has anything specific about, what should we be doing, both on the emergency services side for the township and on the resident side. What can we do to make that better? Eric, go ahead.
Thanks, Dave. I'll take a shot at that. I think you know, the Sunoco's plan is the same, when it comes to an NGL emergency, Sunoco's plan is the same as the government's plan. It is, don't move any light switches, don't use your cell phone, don't operate your garage door opener, don't start any vehicles, just leave the area on foot in the correct upwind direction. That is the plan for the public. And, you know, Sunoco safety experts said that was everything the public needed to know. The problem is, I mean, that is a plan, I suppose, for the public to protect itself, but it's not a credible plan, in my view. You know, in my neighborhood, we have elderly people, we have families with children. Half the time it's dark out, sometimes it snows, sometimes it's freezing. It's just, you might as well say if there's an NGL leak, you should eat a grapefruit. I mean, that's a plan. You know, I suppose, you know, Sunoco's view is this plan meets the public awareness requirements of RP 1162 and the federal regulations. My point is, while it may be a plan, it's not a plan that can credibly be put into operation by a lot of people a lot of the time. And so for me, the question is, what I understand from my conversations with first responders is that if they are able to detect a combustible vapor cloud, especially when it's heavier than air, if they detect it, they're not likely to operate into it, because the problem that you can't escape is that an ignition source anywhere in the cloud will ignite the entire cloud. And so my understanding from first responders is they won't operate into the vapor cloud if they detect it. Obviously, if they can't detect it or they don't detect it, they run the risk of igniting it themselves. And so what I keep coming back to over the years is that what the public is left with is self-evacuation. And the manner in which they're supposed to accomplish that is not credibly possible for most people most of the time. And so for me, it's less about what first responders are going to do than what is the public going to do, because self-evacuation is the thing. When there's been accidents involving NGLs in the past, self-evacuation is the thing that has saved people's lives. Staying in place, waiting for someone to come and get you, has often resulted in fatalities. And so this is really my question for first responders, and I think there's something here for townships to do, which I think is simply to be honest about what the facts are, and not to shade things in a way, not to indicate to people something that's not true. I think people can handle the truth and deserve the truth, and so that's my thought on first responders. I don't know that there's a lot to be done with tabletop exercises and more work by first responders, because in the end, it's not what first responders are going to do.
Could there be different plans for different sections of the township? I'm thinking, you know, schools versus neighborhood versus no village versus.
Well, I don't know what the alternative would be. You know, both the government and the operator has a single plan, which is to leave the area on foot in the correct upwind direction. You know, Sunoco's own expert said that's everything the public needs to know. Of course, it's not, because the question is how do you physically accomplish that?
Eric, I'll add one other thing too, because I thought it was a very interesting comment, and Eve's colleague from Clean Air Council, Catherine Rabanowitz, asked, I thought was a great question of this expert, who was a very nice guy, very well spoken, seemed to know what he was talking about. And Catherine said, well, what about people who can't move on foot? And he looked at her and said, I don't have an answer for you, which I thought was pretty powerful. And that's the reality of it. Schools, nursing homes, people in prison. And frankly, I think that's, and Eric, I think you're right. I think we need to be honest. I think, though, if you're honest about it, that's, and again, I don't want to speak for the company. I don't know what the company thinks. I would think that that's why they don't just say it's a problem, because I think people will say, well, then it's not coming here. And more people would say, then it's not coming here.
David, I would add to what Mark is saying that, and what Eric has said, that evacuation plans, whether you're talking about an NGL or in an NGL situation particularly, are going to vary between where you are, whether it's a rural or a suburban or highly populated, high consequence area, what the weather conditions are. Is it winter or is it summer? Is the wind blowing? Is it raining? And so I think the bottom line of what we're all saying is exactly what the board has said, that it is ill-conceived to put an NGL in this community into the right-of-way that Sunoco has chosen. And frankly, they chose it because, as Carolyn referred to, it was the only way they were going to put this pipeline in. The only way they were going to accomplish constructing these pipelines was to use their existing right-of-way. They knew that the opposition would be so strong in greenfields being areas that don't have pipelines, that it would be nearly impossible. So when they say it was the best route, it was the best route for them as a corporation. That's the bottom line. Pipeline Safety Coalition sat down with Sunoco, and Bernie knows this story 4 years ago, and they said, hey, we want you to work with the community. And I said, no, it's a really bad idea. Why? Safety. You don't put these lines, whether you have a right-of-way or not, you don't put these lines into high consequence areas. And so when you're talking about evacuation plans, I'll go back to, yes, it's a natural gas pipeline in my field, but the land agent, when I said, what's my emergency response? He said, run like hell. I told him I didn't think that was funny, and he said, actually, you don't have an emergency response plan. If that pipeline explodes, you are dead. And I think that's the harsh reality that we don't want to have to say to people, but that is with an NGL leak, depending on the circumstances. Again, that's why it's so hard to really nail it down. Depending on the circumstances, you may not be able to escape.
Let me go, I want to get to Lex and Bill, who are both with EGC, both residents, and correct me if I'm wrong, but I think Bill is the legislative liaison for EGC, and Lex kind of heads all things and writes the newsletter and so on. And one of the things that, speaking about evacuation plans and so on, I heard mention of the idea of legislation around pipeline density. Has anybody talked about that? I know Andy Dinman referred to it at one point, but I don't know if any bills have been introduced, and does that make sense? Is that something that we intuitively, we're not speaking for the entire board, it's something that I think we might support, right?
David, I don't know anything specific of legislation being put forth for pipeline density to say we're not going to approve a pipeline here, really ultimately because you don't have siting authority when it comes to where a pipeline is going to go. And to the point that Eric brought up and everybody brought up at the table, that Sunoco put the pipeline where they went because it was a path of least resistance. The bottom line, financially, it was already in the ground, 70, 80-year-old easements, that's why they took the path they took. But I do want to, I've got a couple of things to say, and I want to kind of tag into that if you don't mind. Just for the audience, the reason I'm sitting up here, number one, I'm a resident of East Goshen. The closest home in Bowtree to the drilling rig that's up on Boot Road, about 450 feet from my back door. My experience, I spent 27 and a half years at UPS. At one time, I was responsible for most of the East Coast, from Maine down to Virginia, is both an operations manager and industrial engineering manager. And with that being said, the reason I bring it up, I think it's important. I find it very hard to believe, as I've been involved in this for about a year now, that a company as large as Sunoco doesn't have a planning process that every large company has, like we had at UPS. We have a 10-year planning meeting. 10-year planning meetings, we're looking 10 years down the road, we know where the building's going to go, the employment, the status, the drivers, et cetera. And Sunoco has a plan on paper that they can look way down the road and say 10 years ago they knew they were going to come back to this location when the Marcellus Shale reserves were found. They took the path of least resistance and they're going to come this way. And the reason I bring that up, you brought up, David, which is great to hear, almost a standing ovation that all 5 members of the Board of Supervisors agree. It's all conceived that an NGL pipeline runs through our township. So knowing that right now, our number one vision, I think, of everybody in this room is to stop it. We don't want it here because it's not safe. And one of the things I will bring up on an NGL pipeline, Linda, correct me if I'm wrong, you're going from a product that handled about 300 or 400 PSI to 15 to 1600 PSI. You're going through repurposed pipelines. Some of these pipelines are extremely old. Now, Sunoco says full transparency, that they monitor these pipelines 24/7, and I'm sure, Eric, that's what they told you as well. There's a newsletter that came out from Sunoco that I pulled off the web today, and it speaks to transparency. It's really well worded what we're doing for all the constituents along the pipeline. We're committed to transparency throughout the construction of the Marinades project, from the planning to the pre-construction and construction. We have strived to provide communications to all municipalities impacted by the project. Okay? Transparency, well, if we go to full transparency, one of my requests would be that if you're full transparency and you truly monitor the pressure in these pipelines 24/7, then make that available to the public if it's built, that you put up to the web, real time, 24/7, what the pressure is in the pipeline, where your valve stations are, everything. If you're fully transparent, that is got nothing to do with Homeland Security. All you do now is you got 18,000 people in this community that have a right and more to go into the web and say, look at the pressure in the pipeline. Why did that pipeline just have a different pressure? And we're utilizing some concepts here that we've been advised, both Lex and I and Ron Coco, through some people that we deal with on the side that are giving us some counsel with this right now. Doesn't cost them anything. Another thing I'd like to say to the board, if there is a leak in this pipeline, and I was at the meeting at the East Goshen, at the East High School, when they mentioned, you run in the opposite direction, lick your finger, which way is the wind blowing? It's appalling to have that as a contingency plan for anything that has to do with safety. And somebody in the audience at that meeting brought up, why does it have an odorant? No, it doesn't have an odorant. There was a great meeting that I went to in West Whiteland on March 19th. Some of the people here were in attendance, and I'll repeat what I said there at a follow-up meeting. But there were extremely bright people in the room. There was Paul Metro from the PUC, very believable. Linda, I think you know Paul, fairly well. Experienced, very believable. There was a member from FERC. There was 2 members from the DEP. That really, I don't know why they were in the room, because it really lent nothing to the whole conversation. It was a lot of, check our website, we'll get back to you on that. But back to what Paul Metro said, he's an engineer, I'm an engineer. He mentioned there are no agencies in the Commonwealth of Pennsylvania that have siting authority over pipelines. Those are his words, not mine. The PUC has 21 employees to enforce the safety requirements for a total of 81,213 miles in the state. Simple math. 3,867 miles per engineer. And this year they've announced they're going to add 2 additional employees to the payroll, because they're going to add another 50,000 miles of pipeline through the Marcellus Shale. So it goes back, because somebody also brought up the fact at this meeting, why don't we have odorants in it? And I don't know if anybody was in attendance, but why do they not want odorants in, like when you turn on your natural gas stove, you can smell that, hey, I think we got a gas leak. They don't want odorants in it because the end customer user doesn't want odorants in it for their product. So one of the recommendations to Sunoco would be, why can't we have an odorant added to the product that can either be removed after shipment or destroyed during the production process? Is that too much of an ask? Because when that leak happens, which it will, you're going to see a visible low-lying cloud, and then it's too late. Well, maybe some people's sense of smell is a lot better than the sight, and they might smell it and be able to notify someone in advance. So you've got the 24-hour monitoring, put it up on the web. You've got the odorant that you could put into it, destroy it in the production process. But if you're truly committed to transparency and safety, Why are those options not considered? So again, you know, it's great that you folks are having this meeting tonight. I feel honored to be up here and have an opportunity to speak. And I really want to thank the residents of East Goshen, because this is by far the best turnout we've had. What I would recommend to everybody here is go knock on your neighbor's door and bring them to the next meeting. There's Marty, like in the movie Jaws, favorite line, I think you're gonna need a bigger boat. You're gonna need more people to come here, because this is a fact. This Sunoco project will be in your backyard for at least one more year. Those are their numbers, not mine. And with Adelphia coming through, which I know we don't want to speak about tonight, but there are 9 pipelines in East Goshen. These 2 will make 11. And you're lining up 5 other companies who can come through and do the same thing, because nobody's here to stop it. So I would highly recommend that we support Carolyn Comita, Andy Ditterman, anybody else that wants to get on board, that you need legislation in the state of Pennsylvania to ultimately say that we are going to have a pipeline commission in the state, because we're the only state in the country out of 38 that have pipelines that doesn't have a pipeline regulatory commission of their own. One siting authority can look at it and say, you know what, this is a bad idea. 3 years ago, to come through this area, high consequence area, is a really bad idea. You came in here when there was farmland 80 years ago, well, now your population has gone off the charts. It's not the right place to be. So those are a couple of things that I would like to add to the group. And on a personal side, I've called Sunoco 3 times in the last month. Now, these are people I met with for lunch 6 months ago. Anytime I picked the phone up, they would call back. Because the wind blows from that drilling site directly into my backyard. My siding was filthy. The pool, I power washed it this week with a hazmat mask, respirator, goggles, the whole thing on. I'm not saying this about myself, but I don't know what's in it. So the orders to my family is the windows stay closed, you run the air conditioning all spring and summer, and I'm trying to get the product that I took off the siding tested. It's never been this filthy. I've lived there 18 years. I've only power washed it twice. From last year to now, it's absolutely filthy. I don't know what's in this product. So is anybody here from the PUC, from FERC? Anybody here from the DEP? Anybody here from Sunoco? No? Speak now, forever hold your peace. So I'll give you my card, because I'm trying to get somebody from Sunoco to call me back, because I'm gonna have it tested. I wanna know what I'm supposed to do and what's in it, not just for myself, but for all the neighbors in the area. What's blowing around in this dust cannot be a good component. So with that, those are my recommendations.
Bill, you're the only person we haven't heard from. So.
That's a tough act to follow. So I'm Lex Pavlo, and just a little bit of background. Bill pulled me into a meeting at Fugit about a year ago, and I live right at the intersection of Boot Road and 352. So my choice was to sit in the corner and suck my thumb about all this, or scream at the top of my lungs and hope something happens, or get involved, become part of the solution versus part of the problem. I've been fortunate to have met Bernie, who turned me on to Linda, having crossed paths with everybody on this panel, and Melissa deserves a shout out, probably the biggest heart of anyone in this room, who have basically been passionate and forthright in their not only dislike and distaste about these pipelines, but in the passion to never back down. So it's tough to follow Bill, and I have part of the solution that I would like to share here that sort of bundles all this together. But we have representation at these meetings since June, since I've been involved last May or June, and never once have I seen the room filled up. So we're doing something right here. You all are doing something right. Everyone at this table, regardless of which advocacy group or which NGO, we're getting word out, we're getting people involved. It's always been my belief that East Goshen Township has done a pretty darn good, commendable job of getting things done, but you're one small township, we're one small township here. So the value to me tonight is people are now getting involved. The first meetings happened in 2014, and I'll stand in line as that was the first one that said, it's no big deal, they'll just cover it up, they'll reseed and everything will be done. Not quite so, and so thank you for everyone coming in. Thank you for the elected officials from Representative Comita's office, thank you. From Senator Dinniman's office, thank you. And from Senator Killian, hoorah, Yeah, thanks. I haven't seen any Killian representation at these meetings, so this isn't partisan, it's not Republican, it's not Democrat, it's community, and that's really why we're here. I'm not nearly as smart as the folks on that side of the table who have been doing this a lot longer than me, right? They've dug in, they understand, I mean, I can't write fast enough to keep up with Eric, but I marvel at the various things that he knows and his passion towards this, and Caroline, a mother, and an employee, and gosh knows what else, same. What I've always looked at, what I've tried to lead East Goshen Safety and Environmental is to look at, in the land of a thousand cut theory, to look at kind of everyone kind of doing their thing, right? But what East Goshen and safety, and it's really from my perspective, but with support of Bernie and Christy, who's somewhere back there, and Bill and Linda and others, how can we add structure to this? How do we add structure so every time there's every other week meeting, there's not a bunch of us stand up and say, hey, those NGLs, they're going down to Market Sook, they're going to be used for plastic bottles, what the hell are we going to do about that? We've talked about that for over a year, and I think what we're trying, and to David's credit, what can we do about it, right? So I think that's why we're here now. I'm a fan of structure. It's probably because I'm a simpleton by trade. I like to have, I need to know where all the pieces rotate. So we put together a chart, and I'll be happy to, I'll send it out to anyone who's on the newsletter. You can come to our website, and everyone can have a copy of it. It doesn't mean it's cast in stone, but we're recommending that East Goshen Board of Supervisors, for the vast sum of $4,000 that you all make, which is still staggering for the amount of time you put in, to establish one person to be the pipeline, or well, I'm calling it the czar. I know, Marty, you'd probably like to be the czar, but you can figure out whoever that czar is. But that would be the direct connect. It's not just East Goshen, it's not Goshen, just Goshen for all, it's not clean air, clean water, it's not Middletown. It's anybody who wants to be a part of this solution, part of the versus part of the problem. And basically, that advocacy committee, call it whatever you want, and it could be volunteer, you can assign it, and once a month we get together. And part of that is to frame up what are the kind of Pareto principle. If 20% of the issues create 80% of the pain, let's knock them down. Let's put them in writing and say, here's what we're going to do, not for David to fix or for Carmen to fix, but as a community for all of us to take a piece of it and say, you know what, maybe Linda Farrell can help us because there's some really good information. Some of this path has already been kind of paved. And let's leverage her background. Let's leverage what Eve has done with clean air. And what are some of the things that some of the attorneys have done, right, in Mark's world? Because I don't have the bandwidth to figure it all out, but I do know there's enough smart people at this table here. If there was a structure to it, there'd be a way to do it. So I've gotten to know Marty, and I'm going to label our relationship as genuine, and that's about as good as I can get with most people that I know. Genuine meaning he can tell me how he feels, and I can tell him how I feel. I love the Easter egg hunt over at East Goshen Township. There's other things that we've disagreed on, but what better way to do this would be to set up a model that East Goshen Township can lead, right? Have a committee, somewhat dovetailing on what Linda said, have this advocacy community, 10 people, 8 people, 5 people, 12 people, someone from Hershey Mills, someone from Bowtree, someone from Pin Oaks, and sit down and talk through and get back to their tribes, if you will, with the czar, and basically say, here are the things we're going to do in the next 60 days, and measure them. And that takes us to the next leg of this kind of pinwheel would be, do you think West Goshen would be interested if we found some traction here, that we solved some issues in the community that they could leverage? Maybe, maybe not. But then we would have a czar for, so now this little East Goshen Township idea starts sprouting other community activities with it from townships. And we specifically contacted, Bill did, Representative Committa and Killian, because we vote for you all, right? And you support us, and you want to know how we feel. You'd like to know what's on our minds. And I know Representative Committa says, we're all pipeline all the time. That's all the calls we get. And so we have her here. And Dinnerman goes without saying what he's doing, even though we can't even vote for him. Kellyanne, I'm going to say this is a great opportunity for you to stop in and hear this. So we take the townships, we take the elected officials, you start blending that together, it's kind of a rope that we're all pulling through a little small hole, right? And then eventually those elected officials can start, I hate to use the word conspire, but communicate with your peers in Harrisburg. Here's what my constituents are saying, and you know what? People in Oxford or other townships may or may not have the same pain we have, but I think we're pretty vocal. You can take Melissa, you can take Carolyn, you can take everybody at this table. We've made some pretty good headwind here within Chester County. There's no reason why we can't replicate that. I'm also a fan of checklists. Anytime, David mentioned to me today on the phone, there's 53 applications for new pipelines that have gone to FERC, 53. I bet if we took a poll tonight, we could all come to grips with the fact that probably 20 of them will come through Chester County, assuming FERC rolls over and does what they normally do, which is to say, hey, okay, go do it because it's good for the economy. We need to be mindful of that, all right? And we need to set up this little advocacy group here, spearheaded by the Board of Supervisors, that we can then put checklists together with the help of Linda and Eve, saying, you want to make sure when it comes to easements, you have that. I don't know what to ask for. I'm not saying that you all haven't had experience, but why not leverage subject matter experts to do that? And then finally, it's communication. I've gone to enough of the meetings, and it's still stunning to me. People pull up into my driveway, hey Les, what's going on with the pipeline? Seriously? I mean, really, what's going on with the pipeline? I think you don't give yourself enough credit, you don't mark it quite as well as you could, and I think part of that little committee that we put together could help. How do you make it better? How do you communicate better? Not to pat yourself on the back, but just to say, hey, here's what's going on, and then the pipeline czar, once a month, instead of having sporadic 8 or 10 people show up here and ask about certain things, the pipeline czar says, the activity for the month on the pipelines was as follows, A, B, C, D, E, that's all I have to report. Questions from the community? No. Everyone's up to date, it goes on the website. So that sort of ties everything together. My business background says you have to put calendars with activities. So whether it's 15 days to name a czar, 30 days to put a committee together, 45 to 60 days to establish those top 3, 4, 5 things that are on the minds of folks, and ask for support from the elected officials. You guys work tirelessly. I don't know if you ever take a day off or work less than 10, 12 hours, but I would think it would be nice to have you all kind of peripherally involved and know what's going on with your community. So that's my 2 cents. I don't know if that was what you're looking for, but I've always wanted to have a seat at the table here, so thanks for asking me. And we're going to try and be part of the solution and not part of the problem.
Thank you.
Who's the problem?
I'm looking for Caroline. Yeah, just kind of hanging heads here. Is there anything that you all haven't talked about that would help us, that we're not doing now, or we could do better? And we probably need some discussion at some point about, I'm hearing a lot of communicate better, but I need to understand what that means, specifically how do we do that, and hearing about the advocacy network idea, but it would be good to, are there other methods, other vehicles that we could be using to communicate with our residents? But Caroline, you have something else?
I was just going to say that a common issue that we all have found in this case is that the residents have had to take their own safety into their hands. We, the community, have had to report Sunoco when they wouldn't report their own activity. The community has been personally responsible for many of those violations that may never have been noticed if it weren't for citizens of this community. And yet, the public is still, there is still a large amount of the public that is grossly misinformed about this pipeline, about why NGL pipelines are particularly dangerous, and about why this isn't just another pipeline. As we frequently hear people say who want to dismiss this project, we have pipelines everywhere. How many of us have heard that over and over? I hear it on a weekly basis. And it is so important to educate the public to a level of what nuclear power plants, how they educate their communities. Everyone needs to know exactly why this is different, and you have a powerful platform to help with that education. So it is the operator's responsibility to notify the public, to educate those in the community, whether it be first responders, They just met with first responders in November. Mariner 1 has been operational for almost 3 years now. It's a little late, number one. Number two, they are supposed to help with emergency management planning of school districts and other groups. Westchester Area School District just sent a letter in March saying, we don't have all of the information we need, and we're asking for a risk assessment. Downingtown Area School District followed as well. The community, but also our agencies and our organizations and our community centers are still saying, we don't have the information we need. And yet, if there is, to Eric's point about how ridiculous and implausible the recommended evacuation plan is, if there's to be any opportunity or any chance of evacuation, everyone has to know, because the first person that gets in their car puts us all at risk. And at my son's school, they just had a pipeline evacuation drill for the very first time 2 weeks ago. The school, their solution was to put a gate in between the school and Hershey's Mill so that the kids could evacuate through the gate, whereas otherwise they were blocked in by that fence. The problem becomes if the wind is blowing in the other direction. Then they have to go via the pipeline route. I appreciate, having sat in many township meetings and pipeline listening sessions, have heard an official who I give a lot of credit for saying there are some cases where evacuation is not an option. And so it is essential that people understand in this community, people that are still saying this is no different than I've had pipelines in my backyard for years, truly understand why this is different. And because Sunoco won't do the right thing, we have to. And we hope that municipalities like East Goshen and others will help us be that education platform. But one of my suggestions, it's really a question for Mark, because it was what I was thinking of when I was driving here in terms of a suggestion for East Goshen to consider in relation. I know that when you filed for intervener status for the emergency petition, that was denied. And yet the formal complaint is still moving forward. And so my question would be, would it be helpful for East Goshen to file as an intervener for the formal complaint, or to file their own formal complaint for something?
Yeah, I'll tell you, my feeling is, intervener is always great for me, right? Because the more people with me, the better it is. Having Clean Air Council there was a tremendous help. But when you intervene, you're generally taking the case as it is. And this case is, because of where Senator Dinniman's district is really focused on West Whiteland. So I would say if for East Goshen, with East Goshen issues, you want to follow your own action with regard to East Goshen issues. And that sort of leads into the one thought, and I don't want to, we've covered a lot of good ground, but I sort of wanted to segue that into what Bernie was talking about with having an expert. I think the real issue is it's not one expert. It's really a team of experts. One of the things, and I have to say, I haven't looked closely at the geology of East Goshen. I don't know how it compares to West Whiteland or Euclid or different. Yeah, but that's, the geology is one of the issues. It's not the only issue. Obviously, density is an issue, and in fact, one of the things we've been talking about is, co-locating the pipe. And yeah, I think the reality is that, Sunoco did it because, and they even say it, although they say it as a positive, it requires less eminent domain. But really, they're doing it because it requires less eminent domain. They already have the easements. It's an easier route. It goes straight through. The reality is that the regulations actually require that they keep the pipeline away from residential, industrial places of public assembly to the extent practical. And of course, what does that mean to the extent practical? But they've actually done the opposite, really, of what they're supposed to. They actually said on the stand, and I only know this because unfortunately I've been reading these transcripts for the last 4 days, that they co-located it to the extent practicable. To my mind, that flips the requirement on its head, and does exactly what you're not supposed to do. But that's what they did, and they think it was justified because they believe that's what the Pipeline Infrastructure Task Force recommended. But anyway, the point I wanted to get back to was, knowledge is power, and it's not just a risk assessment, which is great, and that's an important piece. There's engineering, there's geology, there's pipeline safety, there's emergency response, and those are all the things that together, you put that all together, and then you have a full understanding of the situation. It's like, the old adage about, the group of blind people with an elephant, and one person says the elephant, oh, he's like a trunk, and the other one says, no, the elephant's more like a big leg. But, you can't just take it piecemeal. You have to take the whole thing, and there's a lot of moving parts. And I think when you put all those moving parts together, that's when you really are able to do something either as a municipality or as a group or as, an organization. We started out, someone started out by mentioning, this case that came down, which was based on endangered species. Now, without having, I'm sure it took a lot of work, and there were a lot of biologists and other folks that probably spent a lot of time looking at all this information. So you really need to put a team together. So, Carolyn, I don't know, I sort of meandered around your question, but I don't know if I answered it.
Can I ask Mark a question? I have a lot of regard for Mark. He and I, sorry about that, thank you, Bill. Mark and I have traveled in some circles so I have a lot of respect for Mark, and I have a lot of respect for lawyers, and one of the things that they're good at is summarizing. I would like Mark, if he can, to take all the conversation tonight and distill it down into perhaps 5 things that you heard in the English language that we could do. And I don't know if that's a possible dream or it's an impossible dream, but it would be helpful if we could write down 2, 3, 4, or 5 things in the English language that we could consider doing that helps us or helps both us and you folks accomplish your objectives. So, you think you can do that, Mark, or is it impossible?
Unfortunately, I had actually stolen Janet's pen earlier. I didn't even bring a pen with me, and my short-term memory is not great. But I will. And again, I don't want to repeat. And I think there's probably other folks here even that can do this better than I can. But I do think it involves having the right consultants that help you. I think it's information. I think the municipality can be a distributor of information. I think I'm gonna let other folks, rather than take a lot of time meandering,
I'll take a stab at it. So we did have a suggestion from Linda about relying on outside nonprofits and other agencies to provide consulting and support. We had a suggestion from Lex around forming some sort of group that comes together monthly. I would just add that in Middletown, at one point, the township established a pipeline safety advisory committee made up of residents. They met monthly just like any of the other, zoning committee or sewer committee or whatever other committee. It just became another committee of the township. We had a suggestion from Eric, which may have been some sort of litigation angle, but it revolved around, to the extent possible or practicable, revoking local municipal permits if the operator is in non-compliance. We had a suggestion from Caroline to fund the risk assessment to the extent the township is able to support gathering additional information and data. You had a good one too.
Sigma Bell, the independent independent inspector to
Yeah.
review the need for a safety valve and other safety issues.
Yeah, so maybe that person would be on the committee that Lex suggested. We had suggestions around either intervening again in PUC or possibly filing a complaint with the PUC. You know, and just to add on to that one, if I may, Bill, you mentioned the operator not wanting to odorize the material because of the end product. So we should take a moment to acknowledge that the end product is plastics production in Europe, and yet this pipeline is classified as a public utility. To the extent that any local municipality or elected official can engage in untangling that illogical conclusion that the state has come to, you know, I think that would be most helpful, because all of our communities are basically being put at risk right now for Scottish plastic.
Yeah, unfortunately, I'll just, because with the last meeting that Representative Committa put together, there was a PUC representative, and the PUC takes the view that to be a utility, you essentially need a user, right, a local user, a user that's in the state. And they take the view that the suppliers, the people putting the stuff into the pipeline, are users, and that's what makes it a public utility.
It's quite a circular logic. The last thing that I will add is just that there were some suggestions around DEP, getting information out to members of the community when those comment periods open up at Bowtree or other local places. I would just add from the council's perspective that the operator has demonstrated beyond doubt that they do not and cannot comply with the laws of the state, the 102 and 105 statutes, and our Constitution, frankly. So from our perspective, you know, they've had a chance now for, what, 15 months, and they've demonstrated that they can't comply with the law, and therefore the permit should be revoked. So to the extent that the local township can advocate with the residents for the DEP to revoke those 102 and 105 permits, to the extent that the local municipality can advocate with the residents to the governor with his executive authority to revoke the permits, to direct the DEP to revoke the permits, that is the direction that we should likely go.
Yeah, I'll just... It's interesting, when DEP did issue the suspension order, one of the findings they made is that Sunoco had demonstrated an inability or unwillingness to comply. 36 days later, they let them start up again.
Yeah.
I don't know, when I can't do something, it usually takes me more than 36 days to figure out how to do it.
Just this past week in Middletown, in Delaware County, the operator experienced a series of spills that they failed to report one after another. And so they were once again cited, I believe the notice of violation was posted May 8th, for once again not following their own protocols and their own procedures to report spills when they occur in stock construction. So willful and egregious once again.
And Mark, you know, the order that allowed them to restart, the order from DEP that allowed them to restart, showed the DEP actually started negotiating with them to restart them the day after the notice of shutdown was issued. They found that they were shut down for willful and egregious violations of state law and permit conditions. I just wanted to offer one quick thing, if I can, David, on a concrete suggestion for the municipality. Sunoco is engaged in what I'll charitably call a campaign of deliberate disinformation aimed at elected officials and the public. And, you know, to help them